Shalom. Welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemen. And joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on a very special day. Today, Idan Alexander was released. We watched that earlier. We saw some of the scenes of his reuniting with the family. Day 580, we are moving into day 585 of the hostage ordeal. And but just let's just say a word about what it means for for all of us. This is an American Israeli, born in Israel, came to the United States as a child, lived in Tenafly, New Jersey, not so far from from all of us, really, northern New Jersey, and went as an 18-year-old to be a Chayal Boded, a lone soldier, served in the Golani Brigades, and on October 7th found himself almost alone and then taken into captivity. And for 583 days in captivity, in ways that we are only discovering now. He was held in solitary confinement, bound with uh, hand bindings and chains and malnourished, and all of the suffering that has been reported by other released hostages. The scene of him reuniting with family is just it's poignant and beautiful and just so sad for the other families and of course for those whose lives have been lost. Um, and it's unique, it has a unique moment for us because this is an American Israeli, and it does place a bit of a wedge between Israelis and Americans, and it calls into question, it undermines, I think, the whole idea of Israeli citizenship. So on the one hand, we're elated and delighted and overwhelmed with joy for them and the family. On the other hand, we have real concern about the remaining 58, of which 20 are alive or maybe alive. We don't know. So that's maybe I have a comment on that, and maybe you're just a reflection on this. Just it's how we navigate these moments which are so complicated with joy and also a little bit of real concern.
Say a little bit more about that wedge of Israelis and Americans, and I,
Here's what I'm saying, which is when Israelis see that an American passport gets your get out of jail free card, it's your and that's it's a trivialization. Get out of We will get you. It means that they can't rely on their own government anymore, and that there's an insurance policy that is with a second citizenship. And on the one hand, that's true. On the other hand, Israelis, are very proud of their Israeliness, and they what undermines this whole experience is the sense that they've been failed by their government, that their government
the
is not uh, pledged or carried through the obligations of citizenship or the.
the the ethics of this are you know are a little complicated because they are the ethics of inequality and advantages people have. Lots of people have multiple passports. I'm pretty sure that one of the three of us has multiple passports here. Um,
Don't release that
It is
information.
not I.
lots of people, lots of Israelis have multiple passports. People have wanted, Iberian citizenship from people who were expelled in 1492 is accessible to people. And I have to say that I think, I saw this also on TV. I saw people feel a little bit anxious about this fact that American citizenship helped Idan. But I would just say, first of all, that it's most definitely not a get out of jail free. It's a get out of jail after 594 days of torture.
So that's
And
I
and
didn't mean to. Yeah,
no, I didn't think that you
yeah,
were
no, no, of
diminishing that,
course.
but I think that anybody will think if they think about it for 30 seconds, they will say, uh, it's just frustrating that everybody doesn't have the same treatment. But I'm glad for this family, and I'm
Sure.
glad. And I
And
was, watching the Israeli TV today, and a phrase that is well known to us as Zionist involved American rabbis is Garin Sabar, which is the unit in
that's
the
right.
army which welcomes in lone soldiers and helps them acculturate and get ready for their military service. And we all know tons of people who've been through Garin Sabar, and they were talking about it on the news, and they were singing its praises, and they were saying the kids of Garin Sabar, super Tzioni, super Tzioni. And it's true. They are so committed to Israel, and because his parents and grandparents, I was watching an interview with his grandmother today. I wonder if it would have been a total American, without, just one of our kids who has chosen to live there, as opposed to an Israeli who has returned, an Israeli, born to Israeli family
It's
who,
so interesting,
right.
there's so many shades to that relationship. Here, Israelis themselves have a complicated relationship with Israelis who live outside of Israel for sure. And we American, Jews living here, it's not that we have a complicated relationship. I mean, I have three of them in my own family living there. It's that it we know and they know that because they're not Israeli and because they're not native born and they're immigrants, they're viewed with a kind of curiosity, admiration, and also like, what are you crazy?
Hey, we don't have you have Israeli-born grandchildren,
Yes.
and an Israeli son-in-law who's been in uniform, an American Israeli son-in-law who's
Yeah,
been in
yeah.
uniform, and yeah, that we don't have the same sets of experiences, but I do think that, broadly speaking, there is a great love, and if one of the remaining hostage families were like, Donald Trump is not getting my kid out, you might have that reaction. But if you think about it for 30 seconds, you realize that a year and 7 months in, we've just done whatever we could, and we're happy for this family. And I hope some other lever can be pulled tomorrow. But what you also said, which is such a big deal, is that the stone fact is that the current government has chosen to prolong the war rather than make the agreement, which would have not fulfilled all their initial war aims, but would have released the remaining hostages. And you're right, that a lot of Israelis feel, the polls will tell us that 70% of people would favor an end to the fighting for the return of the hostages, but they're not this, but the 30% are actually running the government. So there's a lot of pain and a lot of dissension that's going on in Israeli society.
It's a difficult time. It's a complicated time. It's a complicated moment. We are also recording this on Pesach Sheni. It's the second Pesach. We should go out and eat
The
a
abridged version, you should point out,
yeah.
it's only one day.
Just to say two words about that. This is the second chance. If you missed the opportunity to offer your Korban Pesach at Pesach, the Torah gives you a second chance, which is what Pesach Sheni is all about. Go have a piece of matzah to commemorate Pesach Sheni. And then we're reading, of course, Parshat Emor this week, which is a fascinating parsha, dealing with a lot of the rules for the Kohanim at the beginning, a lot of who the Kohen can marry, etc., all the rules pertaining to the lives of Kohanim, who they can't associate, and their prerequisites for service. Um, we are familiar, of course, with this parsha because it contains a lot of the sacred calendar. What becomes the Torah reading on festival days. We read them because we'll get the seven Moadei Hashem, the seven festivals of God, four festivals in the seventh month. That's a really interesting idea that comes out. And then, speaking of difficult passages, we get this difficult passage at the end of the parsha about an individual. Individual's not named. It's interesting that his mother's name. We'll talk about that in a second. But I'm referring to the person who is, I guess we'll call him the blasphemer, the person who uh, does utter the name of God in a way that we need to define. So this is chapter 24, verse 10. It says, Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelit, the son of an Israelitish woman, and he's also the son of an Egyptian man. He goes out into the children of Israel, among the people. Vayinatzu b'machaneh ben Yisraelit v'ish hayisraeli. So he starts a fight with someone, or he's fighting with. So there's something that breaks out in the middle of the camp. In the fight, Vayikov ben Aisha hayisraelit, he utters a blasphemy uh, against God's name. He curses God's name. Vayavioto Moshe. So the people around, they bring him to Moses. And then we get the name of his mother. His mother is Shlomit bat Divri Lamateh Dan, a Danite woman. They put him in jail. They put him mishmar, under guard. Lifrosh lahem al pi Adonai, to figure out what to do. So we're going to stop there for a second and ask, you know, what do you make of this? What do you make of? I just want to pose one thing here, which is it's interesting when you think about this scene that they're two men fighting in the middle of the camp. So it's not a private fight, it's a public fight. And then when the perpetrator, I I don't know the circumstances of when he curses, but he curses, so then people take him in. And so I'll suggest my screenplay here is when they're fighting, he's about to lose, and he utters a curse against God's name, and the people go wild. The people go crazy because they know what God's name is, and they form a gang around him, and that's when they grab him and take him in, and they don't know what to do with him, but they do know what to do with him, and they put him under guard, and they want to wait. Lifrosh lahem al pi Adonai. They want to wait for what God says. What do you think happened here?
Well, nothing good.
Nothing.
But what I would say, there are two parts of the story that intrigue me. First of all, this is clearly a sin against God. And one might think that God should take care of this without perhaps human intervention. That part of the confusion on Moses's part is wondering what his own role is in the administration of justice here. But the other thing that comes to mind, especially when you read the verses, is that the cursor is the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian man. So why is he in the Israelite camp? Normally speaking, at this time, you lived in the husband's camp. So properly speaking, from a biblical point of view, not necessarily the rabbinic understanding, this guy's an Egyptian, not an Israelite, and that may be part of the problem too.
I think the
Are
Midrash
these
picks up
curses
on that. Yes.
are these curses effective when they're recited or declaimed by non-Israelites? Is it the same kind of action, the same kind of provocation, if you're not an Israelite? So I think it gives pause for thought and trying to puzzle out how all these details fit together. Because what I'm left with when you started telling the stories, why is the story in the Torah? What's the point?
Well, the
What is it
story is in the
trying to
Torah because
what
it's
is
an
it trying to
example.
teach us?
So
Don't marry an Egyptian or don't curse
no,
God.
no, I think it's a story in the Torah that is about blasphemy. It's a violation of a commandment of the Ten Commandments, and the first 8 or 9 books of the Torah of the Tanakh are organized around violations of the Ten Commandments. Namely, like in Bamidbar, we have the Mikoshesh Etzim, and Devarim, we have the person, the theoretical person who dishonors their parents, the Ben Sora Amor. Each book has an example of a covenantal violation. And so that's what it's doing here, I think, according to this is David Noel Friedman, the Unity of the Hebrew Bible. But beside that, forget biblical criticism, biblical scholarship. I mean, it's a story that is
Right,
terrifying.
but in Sefer Vayikra, which is the shortest book in the Torah, we have two stories.
This one,
One, and then the story of Nadav and Avihu, which takes
right?
about 11 verses. So these are the two stories that you choose to tell.
It's
I
not
don't, I
appealing.
don't, I mean, I would look for something perhaps a little more edifying, something that would be project a positive view of religion rather than a negative one,
Well,
right?
you're kind of assuming because you are a 21st century,
Schizoid man, to borrow a
conservative,
phrase from
21st
King
century
Crimson.
schizoid man. No, you're a 21st century King Crimson.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also cited, by the way, by the rapper known as Ye, formerly Kanye West, the
Yimach
fat Yimach
Shemo.
Shemos, anti-Semite. But because you're a 21st century conservative rabbi, you think this has a negative connotation. But I would say that uh, given what Elliot said about the way that narratives in the Torah seem to be replicating or seem to be illustrating um, uh, some of the major theological or religious principles, I think that those stories, like this one, like the Mekosher Etzim, the one who's gathering sticks on Shabbat, like the daughters of Tzlofchad, who will come to Moses with an objection about the apparent unfairness of inheritance law. They're not exactly feminists, but they are fighting back for some of their own inheritance as daughters. Those stories seem to describe a process by which, and as a student of rabbinics, you totally get this, by which case law elaborates out the bases in the revelation. God tells you some mitzvot, but you always have to ask yourself, okay, well, how do I apply that rule to the situation right before me? And that's what lawyers do. That's what halachic students do. So I'm imagining a story like this that back in the Big Ten, it told us, uh, Lo tisad Shem Adonai Elohecha lashav. Don't take God's name in vain. And now I've got a problem, and I do think that the narrative detail of the Egyptian father is probably a slur against this guy, like a little ethnic slur. And so the half Egyptian guy does this problematic thing, and we have to ascertain, well, what is the response on the ground of how do I and the Torah, by the way, in this parasha, in addition to back in the Big Ten when it said don't take God's name in vain, it also says be very careful to not to lo techalel at Shem Kodshi. V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Israel. Do not desecrate my holy name, and then I will become sanctified among the children of Israel. That's earlier in our parasha. Um, so now I got to figure out, like, well, what constitutes a violation of that exactly? And in this case, they ask Moses to ask God, who amplifies the rule and helps us figure out how to apply it.
All right, so I want to suggest one thing here, which is that there's a detail missing in between verse 12 and verse 13, where verse 13 is, and God said to Moses, saying, okay, so the detail that's missing between they put him in jail to figure out what to do, lifrosh lahem al pi Adonai. That's a very, very strange expression. Lifrosh lahem al pi Adonai. They put him in jail to explain to them al pi Adonai on the basis of what God said. In other words, they're waiting for a divine message, but put that aside and say, okay, well, in the if you had a trial here of this individual, what's the prosecution case and what's the defense case? And where is Moses in this trial?
So I want to suggest something else, based on what you just said. That maybe Lefrosh al Pi Adonai means that this case isn't quite what we're used to from the legislation. So it requires, we would say in rabbinic language, sarich iyun. It needs further investigation, and that's why he's put in the jail. That, in other words, they're not waiting for a sign from God. They're waiting to review the laws that they have to figure out how to proceed next.
And that,
Well, this is exactly what I was arguing for. But I do think there is a kind of oracular in consultation with God. By the way, Elliot, you said, um, what's the narrative? What's the story here? Like, what did the half Israelite or the son of the Israelite mother, what exactly did he do? I mean, I'm going to give you a couple of options. He's fighting with this other guy, and now I'm just making up. And he's fighting with the other guy, and he's the verbs are a little bit difficult. Vayikov ben haisha haYisraelit et Hashem vayikalel.
It's two verbs.
Two verbs, and Vayikov could be curse. Ma'akov lo kabo el, says Bilam.
Yeah.
So it could be that word of curse. How shall I curse whom God has not cursed? Or it could be the nun kuf bet root, which means to take hold of or to like pronounce. So it could mean that the ben haisha haYisraelit, the Israelite mother child, um, pronounced the name in a curse, or cursed his adversary. He's fighting with this guy, um, and maybe he's losing, and he's getting whooped in this fight, and he does the only thing he has left, which is to say, perhaps he pronounced the Yod He Vav He, or perhaps he said, "May God smite you." And the really terrible thing is to call down divine wrath on the guy he's fighting. Maybe he said, as they say in the Book of Mormon, I forget how, not the religious book, the musical. They have this African sounding fake made up word, which means, when really, really bad things happen, we tell God to,
To what? Okay. There.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let that one go. So maybe he's gotten his butt whooped, and he looks up at heaven and says, "You terrible God, why did you let this happen to me?" Any of these things are possible. We don't have enough data, but I'm like you Elliot, you're always the guy who like
It's a
says, let's
story.
let's put let's put this in a story. And so I can just imagine a bunch of scenarios in which the thing that the guy did is a key element in figuring out what the punishment that he gets.
So while listening to you, it struck me. It reminds me of a law I think in Schmoke, where again in the context of a fight, one of the fighters' privates is grabbed,
Yeah, it's in Devarim, his wife.
and okay, and that results in terrible consequences for the grabber. And I'm wondering if the Ben Mitzri is had this experience, and his response to this invasion of his privacy, so to speak, is to curse God as a way of trying to end this. And what do you make though of the response of the crowd? Why didn't they just kill him right away? Why did they separate the two and bring this guy to jail?
I think I so
And what happened to the other guy?
right.
Was
Nothing.
did he
He's
bear
off the
no guilt?
screen, off the stage. There is a bit of a mob going on here, and so the fact that the mob doesn't up and kill the guy, I think, is a way that the mob is trying to present itself in a moral light, notwithstanding the fact that they're watching this fight taking place, and the way I would describe it, it's like they're getting excited the way that people in an arena are spectacles at a hockey, fight. Have to always bring hockey in, and the violence is the driver here. It's the driver of their attention, and they're all involved in this violent moment, and they will all be involved in the execution of the individual as his punishment. That's at the end of the story. Spoiler alert, right? The guy gets executed. Okay, and the ones who hear them, the ones who heard the unfortunate cursing of God, they are the ones who place their hands on the cursor and kind of
And move it to
effectuate.
the side so it's no
Yeah,
longer
no,
on the screen.
they designate him that way for punishment.
So
Uh,
I wonder if the crowd doesn't assault the guy is because they actually are in sympathy with him. That,
uh,
in other words, since you mentioned hockey, the guy who throws the second punch is the guy who gets kicked out, right?
always.
So the Ben Yisraeli is the one who threw the second punch.
The third
This
man
guy,
in is the person who gets kicked
this
out.
guy started it, the Ben Mitzri, but the other guy, I think, is the one who's perhaps more responsible because he doesn't walk away.
I
And
feel
I
I feel
wonder,
yeah.
in the story here if perhaps the crowd senses a degree of sympathy for the Ben Misri, and
Yeah.
that's why they don't kill him.
Well,
And they
I'm a
don't really know
reader.
what
I'm going
to
with
do.
that.
I'm a reader, and I feel sympathy for the Ben Mitzri, not because I want to justify the cursing, but there's something about him that feels like he's an outsider. There's obviously that he's
Well,
mixed, and that and I also have a lot of empathy for Moses here. Normally I'm very critical of Moses, but here I give the fact that Moses doesn't immediately execute him speaks well for Moses. It means that he presses pause on the whole situation and he says, I'm not ready to do this. I'm not ready to do this. And I find like I'm reading between verse 12 and 13 a bit of Midrash here that I'm inventing, which is Moses doesn't really want to do this. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, against your own proclivity to not do anything, you have to execute him. You have to,
well,
yeah.
it's striking to me that the mode of execution here is the one that is the most participatory,
It's a
right?
mob.
Because,
It's a
well,
mob
no,
back,
but in other words, I mean, if we're going to inject the rabbi's views of capital punishment, the other three forms of capital punishment that were available, at least for the rabbis, all require one or two individuals at most. This one requires a community, right? Because everyone has to throw the stone. That's part of this form of execution, is that the community kills the person literally. Whereas in the other forms of the death penalty, some individual stands in for the community to administer the punishment,
namely burning, strife,
hanging or decapitation.
hanging, and decapitation. Yes. So these are things that they're part of our ancestry, part of our heritage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's not bad for such a short story that we got a lot of mileage out of it. But I want to ask Jeremy a question. So you talked about the four stories that you mentioned before as being case law.
yeah.
Most of Vayikra, as we discussed when we were off screen, as anyone who's read the book knows, is mostly legislation. Do you see the case law and the legislation as being part of the same tradition, or perhaps different traditions?
I don't. I'm not going to try to make uh, a response to like what do I think the developmental history of
No, I'm
Jewish.
just curious how it strikes you.
No,
I mean,
so
is it
so
a way
I'm
of illustrating the legislation, or
yeah. So what I'm offering, and I'll tell you where I'm getting this is in Moshe Halbertal's book on Ramban, spectacular book. He describes what he calls as the most important debate of halachic philosophy is between Maimonides and Nachmanides. And he said that, Maimonides, in his desire to have, the question is, what's interpretation? And you open up the Talmud, and any pages of the Talmud, Rav and Shmuel disagree, and Abaye and Rava disagree. And so, what does the Jewish student think? The simplest answer that the Talmud gives is that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, they didn't really study very well, and that's how machloket happened. That's how disagreement happened, and it's really their fault. If they were better students, we wouldn't have all this machloket, which is fine, except what it means is that it renders uh, 50% of the Talmud just stupid and a waste of time because it's just wrong. And so Maimonides doesn't, neither Maimonides nor Nachmanides want that. Maimonides says really there's a minimum of revelation, and there's no machloket about the revealed stuff. It was transmitted correctly and pristinely, and the things that there's machloket about are really not part of revelation. So, just here's an example. Um, Nobody ever said that you should pick up 5 species in your bouquet on Sukkot, but we know that there are 4 of them, and they describe that there are 4 of them, and that's pristine revelation. But exactly which plants, that we argued about. God didn't really tell us. So, we had to devise derabanan, um, uh, some non-revealed knowledge to make sense of it. Then Nachmanides doesn't like that. And in the words of Moshe Habertal, says the rabbinic interpretation becomes constitutive of what the divine revelation was. He gives the following examples. If I tell you that there's no vehicle allowed in the park. That's what God said. No vehicle in the park. You have to decide whether a bicycle or a motorcycle or a car or a scooter, which of those count as vehicles. So I'm thinking, and that's Halbertal's, proposal for human interpretation being part and parcel of the Torah. And I like this very much. And so what I'm offering for these case law kinds of stories is to think that God said no blasphemy. Okay, so now we have to, as human beings, as interpreters of the Torah, we have to decide if blasphemy is like, is it technical and ritual? Is it against Yod He Vav He but not Elohim? Is it just the misplaced pronunciation of a sound? Is it invoking the curse on somebody that they should suffer? Like all these things have to be now determined, and I see Moses as having to figure out from something general how to make it specific. That's what I
Right.
thought.
And so then the bottom line is that he ends up not figuring it out, and God speaks to him. So Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor hotzeh et hamekalel el michutz lamachaneh, take him outside. V'samchu kol hashamim at yedeihem, have everybody, all the listeners, place their hands on him. V'ragmu oto kol haida, let the whole congregation stone him. So that, I mean, is that a confirmation of what Moses thought? Is Moses going to protest that? Is Moses going to do an Abraham here and say, that's not a just punishment here,
You
or
know,
or
go ahead.
or
But
he
this
doesn't
is
know how?
part of the divine human partnership because when does Moses ever decide for himself what the law should be? He always goes to God,
Right.
right?
But
And they're both in the legal sections and in the narrative sections.
but can I just say furthermore on that point which you just made, um, our parasha also maybe the character Moses doesn't do that, but the rabbis in
The
fact do
rabbis do.
that.
Sure.
That's what they're about. So I'll just illustrate that the parasha, when this story ends, we say, listen, homicide is a death penalty crime. V'yishki yakek kol nefesh adam mot yumat. If you kill a fellow human being, you should be put to death. Umakeh nefesh behema yishal mena. But if you kill an animal, you have to pay a tort damage. Nefesh tachat nefesh, a life for life. Clearly that phrase, life for life, cannot mean a death penalty crime. We just said that the difference between the human thing is life for life, but an animal thing is a monetary compensation. And then it goes on to say, "Ve'ish ki ten mumba amito," you wound a person, kasher asa ken ye'aselo, as it has been done to him, so shall be done to you. Shever tachat shever, break for break, ayin tachat ayin, eye for eye, shen tachat shen, tooth for tooth. Kasher yiten mumba adam ken yinaten bo. The injury that he inflicted will then be inflicted upon him. And Jewish tradition, our readers and our many readers and listeners will know this or not, is all but univocal that everything except homicide
Yes.
in human conflict, leaving aside blasphemy or idol worship or something, in human conflict, it's always monetary compensation. It's never there. It's never there's never any real talionis. If I cut off your hand, I don't lose my hand. I have to pay you compensation. And that to me is like just the most vivid example that it is the human divine partnership that in interpretation figures out what the Torah really means.
That's interesting. Well, that's probably a good place to end. I started my stopwatch here well after we started this, so we've gone over. But this is all about interpretation. We're all about interpretation, and of course, the laws deserve their interpretation, and the story here, uh, yields many possibilities, which we went into, and we thank our viewers and listeners for watching us and listening to us, and for your continued loyalty to the Parsha Talk.
One last comment,
And one
though,
last comment.
is that normally we end with an interpretation of a verse. This is one of the very few shows where we actually ended with the citation of the verse.
Very
So
nice.
kol hakavod to Jeremy.
Very good. Well, thank you. Have a good week, everyone. We'll listen. We'll be Parsha talking with you soon.
Shabbat shalom.
Everyone, Shabbat Shalom. Bye bye. Take care.